Hello students, Archana is here. Welcome to the 8th session of presentation in English. Today, let us deal with chapter 4, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in the Forest by Vandana Shiva. Before we deal with the prose, let us know about the author. Vandana Shiva is an internationally renowned activist for biodiversity and against corporate globalization and author of several books, including Stolen Harvest, The Hijacking of the Global Food Supply, Earth Democracy, Justice, Sustainability and Peace and Soil Not Oil, and Staying Alive. In the essay, Vandana Shiva reveals to the readers all about her early lessons of environmentalism. She further tells us how she learned all the major ideals of a good life from the forests, such as diversity, freedom, and coexistence. Vandana Shiva's ecological journey started in the forests of the Himalaya. Now, let us go through the prose. Vandana Shiva's father was a conservator of forests in the Himalayan region. This implies that she lived and was brought up in the forest surroundings. Hence, she declares that whatever she knows about ecology was learned from the Himalayan forests and ecosystems. Her mother was a farmer and she used to compose songs and poems about trees, forests, and India's forest civilizations. Thus, her parents and their profession undoubtedly shaped the author's interest in ecology. Chipko Movement. The Chipko Andolan or the Chipko Movement is a movement that practiced methods of satyagraha where both male and female activists from Uttarakhand played vital roles. Here, Vandana Shiva's involvement in the contemporary ecology movement began with Chipko. It was a non-violent response to the large-scale deforestation in the Himalayan region. In the 1970s, peasant women in the Garhwal, Himalaya, had come out in defense of the forests. Vandana Shiva noticed a steady loss of forests in this region. The ruthless cutting down of trees results in floods, landslides, scarcity of water, fodder for cattle, and fuel. This affects the women folk in particular because they have to walk long distances for what? For collecting water and firewood, which is quite burdensome. Bachri Devi, a woman from the village of Adwani in the Himalaya, led resistance against her own husband. Why? Because her husband obtained contract to cut trees. When officials arrived to the forest to cut down the trees, the women held lighted lanterns, although it was broad daylight. They ironically told the officials that they had gone there to teach them forestry. This, in fact, enraged the forester, who further said that the forests produce profit. We get profit from the forest. In what way? Profit and resin and timber. The women sang back in chorus, reminding the officials that forests bear what? So, women told that the usefulness of the forest, that they bear soil, water, and pure air. Yes, the resistance was effective, for it made them realize the seriousness of the situation. The officials also came to know that there was awareness among the local women over indiscriminate logging. Women knew the real value of forest was not the timber from a dead tree, but the springs and streams, food for their cattle, and fuel for their hearts. The women declared that they would hug the trees, and the loggers would have to kill them before killing the trees. A folk song of that period said, "These beautiful oaks and rhododendron, they give us cool water. Don't cut these trees. We have to keep them alive." So they started singing song by praising the trees, by praising the usefulness of the trees. In 1973, she had gone to visit her favorite forest. Vandana Shiva gone to visit her favorite forest and swim in her favorite stream before leaving for Canada to do her PhD. But the forests were gone and the stream was reduced to a trickle. Then she decided to become a volunteer for the Chipko movement, and she spent every vacation doing padyatras, walking pilgrimages, documenting the deforestation and the work of the forest activists and spreading the message of Chipko. Beyond monoculture. What is this monoculture? Monoculture, the word itself says single culture, that is, the cultivation of a single crop in a given area. From Chipko, Vandana Shiva learnt about biodiversity and biodiversity based living economies. The protection of both has become her life's mission. As she described in her book, The Monocultures of the Mind, the failure to understand biodiversity and its many functions is at the root of the impoverishment of nature and culture. The lessons she learned about diversity in the Himalayan forest she transferred to the protection of biodiversity on her farm. Now, let us know more about Navadanya form, Navadanya movement, etc. etc. The conservation of biodiversity is the answer to the food and nutrition crisis. Is it so? Let us discuss. The conservation of biodiversity is key to solving the problems of food and nutrition. Monoculture is the cause of impoverishment of nature and culture. Most of India's traditional farming consisted of growing a single crop on the field. Though commercial approaches benefited the farmers instantly, they do not help a nation in the long run. Vandana Shiva realized the importance of biodiversity very early and started saving seeds from farmers' fields. Navadanya form resulted in the Doon Valley in the lower elevation Himalayan region of Uttarakhand province in 1994. They now conserve and grow 630 varieties of rice, 150 varieties of wheat, and hundreds of other species. They practice and promote a biodiversity intensive form of farming that produces more food and nutrition per acre. They also help farmers make a transition from fossil fuel and chemical based monocultures to biodiverse ecological system nourished by the sun and the soil. That is how the conservation of biodiversity is a need of the hour. It is very important to promote biodiversity intensive farming because there lies the answer to the food and nutrition crisis. As the population increases, there is a tremendous need to produce large quantities of food besides to increase the yield of the crop and to retain the quality of the soil. Biodiversity intensive farming is a present necessity. Vandana Shiva achieved this by starting Navadanya movement. Navadanya, a biodiversity conservation and organic farming movement in 1987. She has worked with farmers to set up more than 100 community seed banks across India. They have saved more than 3,000 rice varieties. They also help farmers make a transition from fossil fuel and chemical based monocultures to biodiverse ecological systems nourished by the sun and the soil. Now, let's summarize today's session. In this informative essay, Vandana Shiva tells us how she learnt about environmentalism from the uneducated women of Garhwal, Himalaya. Her father was a forest conservator and her mother was a farmer. She learned a lot about ecology from the Himalayan forest. Her involvement began with Chipko. In the 1970s, peasant women from her region had come out to save trees. All women declared that they would hug the trees and the loggers would have to kill them before killing the trees. Vandana Shiva decided to become a volunteer for the Chipko movement and went for Padayatras documenting the deforestation and the work of the forest activities and created awareness about Chipko movement. Bachni Devi, a village woman, led a resistance against her own husband who had obtained a contract to cut trees. The women told the officials that they had come to teach them forestry. From Chipko, she learned about biodiversity and she described the importance of biodiversity in her book. From Chipko, Vandana Shiva learned about biodiversity and she described the importance of biodiversity in her book Monocultures of the Mind. Monocultures of the Mind. She started saving seeds and started Navadanya Farm in 1994 in the Doon Valley. They conserve and grow 630 varieties of rice, 150 varieties of wheat, and hundreds of other species, and got more yield, which became a solution to the problem of food and nutrition crisis. Then she started seed banks across India and instructed and pleaded the farmers to make transition from fossil fuel and chemical based monocultures to biodiverse ecological systems nourished by the sun and the soil. In the next class, let us know more about rights of nature on the global stage, the dead earth worldview, what nature teaches, the poetry of the forest, how the forest can teach us the lessons of democracy. So, home assignments, you have few questions here. Please answer to these questions and submit it in the Google Classroom. Main number 1. Answer the following questions in a paragraph about 80 to 100 words. First question. Trace the childhood experiences that shaped the author's interest in ecology. How did the women led by Bachni Devi put up resistance to the felling of trees? Main number 2. Answer the following questions in a paragraph about 200 words. Third question. The conservation of biodiversity is the answer to the food and nutrition crisis. Discuss. Thank you.